All right, let's do a little video update to answer a simple question, and that is it a logical time to reject from our current level or not? As you know, I incorporate time into my strategies, and right now we are at important resistance, right? We have the where, 44.8K is the level I've been looking at for a while, and now we reached it. And obviously, there's a lot of other things you can do. You can look at confirmations like order flow and price action confirmations, low time frame market structure, breaks, all those kind of very valid things. But for the sake of this video, I just want to focus on the aspect of time. And then obviously you can use it in confluence with other things, but just for the simplicity, I'm going to focus on time. So right now we reach important resistance, and this resistance is something I've been looking at for a while. What I do when I reach resistance like this, among other things, is that I zoom in on the current price action. And how I use time is that I gather data on what the most likely points of the day are, and well, of the week and the 4 hour as well. But for the sake of argument, the most important or most statistically probable points in the day are where daily highs and daily lows are being put in. So the moments. So for that, what I do is that I mark out, the daily open and the daily close, and I look at where's the daily low and where's the current daily high. At the moment, the current daily low is right here, and the current daily high is right here. What I do is that I mark out the whichever one came first as P1, stands for pivot one, so it's the first pivot of the day, and P2 is the second pivot of the day. So whichever came second, right? The daily low was first, so the daily low is P1, and the daily high came second, so that is P2. The reason I'm doing this is very shortly put. I explain it further in some tutorials that I'm going to release, but very briefly put is because this is more actionable. So now I have this data. So I know that my daily low was put in at midnight, UTC plus 0. This is when the trading day starts. So I usually look at I look at time in this way because this is it's the same reasoning as why the daily open horizontal level is the same for everyone. That's why the daily open in terms of time it's the same for everyone as well. They just calculated at UTC plus 0 time base. So the daily low was put in at hour 0 and the daily high was put in at hour 2. So what we do now is look at, okay, what are probable times to put in highs and lows or P1s and P2s. And for that, I have this data right here. So right now I'm looking at the last 3 years of data or so, the last 2 years, more or less the last 2.5 years or something. And what I see here is how often each hour has been putting in P1 or P2. And what I can do here, I can select my current P1 and I can select my current P2. So my current P1 is hour 0, my current P2 is at hour 2. The reason why I can also select this is because I can recalculate probabilities, but I'm not going to get into that for this video. I just want to keep things simple. So what I can see now is that hour 0 has a 27.8% historical occurrence of putting in P1. And hour 2 has an 8.7% historical occurrence of putting in P1. So what this is saying is that 27.8% of the days within the last 2.5 years or so, hour 0 has been putting in the first pivot of the day, right? So either the daily high or the daily low, depending on which one came first. So that's quite significant, right? That's a lot. It's already a golden nugget in my opinion. Hour 0, daily open, Asia open is very important. And 8.7% of the time in that last 2.5 years, it was hour 2 that put in the first pivot of the day. Now, why am I looking at hour 2 as well for this? For a very simple reason. Because if we go from here and don't take out this hour 2 again and go here, then what happens? And what happens is that this P2 becomes P1 because this one is no longer the first pivot of the day, right? We took it out. So what happens is that, say this happens hypothetically, this becomes P2 because now it's the second pivot of the day, and this becomes P1. So the first question we want to ask ourselves is which of these pivots is most likely to be the first pivot of the day? And for that, Well, one very simple way to do this is to look at probabilities for this. Very simply put, we're going to get increased level of complexity here, but very simply put, 27.8% is higher than 8.7%, right? So from a very purely statistical point of view, this one, hour zero, this one has a higher chance of being the low for the day than, or being the first pivot of the day than the high does. All right. So that's one thing. But here comes some other things into play. I have noticed that this kind of low, what you prefer to see is if you put in a low as the first pivot of the day, you prefer to see something like this, and that being P1, not this, right? Which is what we have right now. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Secondly, and I just want to show you how I use this data to make informed decisions, is if I look at the P1 change, this is showing me how often or how this has been developing. So over the last 2.5 years, 27.8% of the time, the first hour of the day put in the first pivot of the day. And what this is showing me that P1 change in the last 50 days, which is what I've selected here, this is 10.7% less. So it has been happening a lot less. So if I make this into 100, you will see this will change. And now it will indicate how much this has been happening less within the last 100 days. So now this is saying in the last 100 days, hour zero has been putting in P1, the first pivot of the day, 8.1% less than what is the average of the last 2.5 years. So the reason why I look at this is for trend changes. And furthermore, I can see that the last time hour zero put in P1, it was 24 days ago. And similarly, the last time hour two put in P1 was 31 days ago. So these two have both not been happening lately at all. And what you can see here is basically the visual representation of this table, right? So here you can just see the visual well, actually, this is the visual representation of that table. You can see how often P1 and P2 happen. So this is P1, the light blue, and this is P2. How often that's been happening, and then the orange line is the aggregate of it. So the orange line basically just shows how likely is it to put in a high or low at this time, which is also valuable information. Right now, I'm looking at this data, and if I press recent data, I'm looking at data only for the last 50 days. So we can dive deeper into this. And again, I just want to show you how we use the data. We can dive deeper into this and press on hour zero right here. So what this is going to show us, because for example, I see there's a massive change here. Right? And there's also an increase in hour one. There's a massive decrease in hour 10. What we can see here is that a chart loads up, which shows the moving average of how often P1 and P2 are put in on the selected hour. So this shows how often P1, the moving average of how often P1 was put in, the first pivot of the day was put in during the first trading hour of the day. And we can see it has been declining. This is from the last 45 days. So the moving average is calculated on the last 45 days. We can go lower, and say I want to see what it was like on the last 25 days. And then it will simply recalculate. And what we will get then is an even clearer overview of what's happening in more recent days. It's the same as EMAs in a chart, right? It's just a moving average. And what we can see here is that indeed we are just on a dive. So what this is telling us is that we're in a short-term trend where the first hour of the day has not been putting in the first pivot of the day. We don't know why this happens. Like we cannot make it up from the. I mean, we can investigate it, but we don't know why exactly it happens. But we don't need to know why it happens. We need to know that it happens. So we can do the same thing with hour two. But already we can say, all right, well, I'm less confident in this being the P1 for the day. That's my interpretation of it. But purely statistically speaking, if you look at the last 2 years, this one has a higher chance over this one. But I don't like the low. I don't like the low. And I also don't like And I mean, I don't like the low as in that, there's not this move that I said. I'd rather see some kind of liquidity. And here we can also see our two has been on a nosedive. Oh, a nosedive. But at the same time, it's very interesting is that you can see once you reach that 0 point where we are now, if you see in the past, we don't stay there for a long time, right? Every time in the past, we stay here. So every time we do not put in the first pivot in the second trading hour of the day, we stay there for a little while, and then we actually have a sharp recovery, which means that after that, we start putting in P1, so the first pivot of the day on the second hour of the trading day, which is very interesting. But both of these right now don't seem very likely to me. So I wouldn't personally, normally, if you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have banked a lot on our zeros, but at the moment, they just seem less likely to happen. Plus, we're in some kind of ranging environment. So then we look at, okay, what's the next probable area to put in pivots of the day? And we can see that lately, our 14 has been increasing quite a bit. So if you look at this right here, the aggregate of the last 50 days, let's take the aggregate of the last 100 days, or look at the aggregate of the last 100 days. Here you can see that our 14 has been putting in quite a bit of pivots. Right, this afternoon area has been becoming more important as of late. We can do the same here, clicking on it. So what that means to me is that I personally don't think both of these are necessarily safe. And what I would want to see then is I would prefer to see a pivot. And here we can see the evolution of our 14. But I prefer to see a pivot putting during a higher probability time zone. And it looks like there's a cluster here that has higher probabilities. We can see it here as well, right? This little cluster right there. So what that means to me is that I'm looking at this as an area, 12, 13, 14, right here. I'll call this a decision zone. So the reason why I'm saying is that this is an area where there's a little bit higher probabilities to put in daily pivots. And if we put in a daily pivot in this area, so say for example, we take out this high right here and then reject, then for me, that is a very interesting, a more interesting short than what we have right now. Because I know this is not a very probable high, but at the same time, not this one, but I'd rather take it from a high probable environment. At the same time, if we don't get there and we do this, say we do this, then that might be an interesting long to take because we're putting in a pivot at a high probability time in this decision zone. And then we can take it back up and possibly target this weak high, so to say. Plus, we have to take into account the fact, obviously, that we're in massive uptrend, and usually we would see some ranging action, and then if we dump from here, I wouldn't expect it to happen immediately. Especially if you take the 4-hour candles, you can see that this doesn't look quite done yet. And then we can do the same on the 4-hour even, but I'm just gonna leave that because it's a feature I'm releasing today. This is my indicator for it. But you can basically apply the same analysis. In the 4-hour, I use a lot, where I'm starting to use a lot for entries, but I want to keep things simple. So let's delete those. So my plan now is simple. I'm going to wait for this to hit because I know that this is the higher probability areas. And right now, I mean, these are statistically high probability areas, but I just see we are in a local, very much local downtrend for both hour 2 and hour 0. And what I mean with that it recently just been happening a lot less. That hour 0 and hour 2 has been putting in the first pivots of the day. So I would find them a little bit less strong. So I'm going to wait for this to be taken out. If I would have to name anything, I would say this one is safer than this one, considering the strong uptrend, even though I don't really like the low. But in general, I would prefer to see them both taken out, and maybe in fashion like this. So this is something I'm looking at. But the most important thing I want you to take away from it, why I wanted to share this, basically just so you can see how I interpret these statistics. I'm, by the way, looking at Mondays through Fridays because I think it's more relevant if you're trading weekdays. And a final remark I want to make is that even though this has been happening less, on a large time frame, our zero is very reliable. So this is gonna it's in that's why I say short-term trend. It's gonna happen again, and then we're gonna be able to long or short the hell out of that first trading hour of the day. See, you can see that on a longer time frame, it actually doesn't really drop below 20%. You could say this is support. So you could say it's not going to get a lot less than this. So at some point, it's going to happen. So also for that, what we say is this one is more targeted than this one is. Preferably, we would see them both taken out. But what you can really take away from it, I think is the most important takeaway, is that for me personally, this is not a short yet. Right? We want to preferably see that have confluence, or at least that's my trading style. Of course, sometimes you're going to have highs at low probability times, but my trading style is that I don't need to take all the trades. I want to take trades that are high probability. So I would prefer to see it in a high probability time zone to take it out and then see what happens, right? Because I mean, it could also do like this, but then at least I can judge and rate the reaction in that high probability time zone. So that's how I read some of this data. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions about it, you can just hit me up. But let's see how this plays out today. I'm looking forward to seeing how it does. But now at least you know how I look a little bit at times in the day. And I hope it makes sense that all of these are simply times where it's most probable to put in pivots during the day. And this is yeah, we didn't even look at P2, but I didn't want to make things too complicated for the sake of this video. And there's a weekly time frame and there's 4-hour time frame that I don't have on this one yet. But let's wait until this has got taken out and then re-evaluate. All right, guys. See you later.